Hi, this is Lilian Withers from crackencrafting.com. I'm so happy that you're joining me today. And I would suggest, if you're watching me on YouTube, to pause the video right here and go to the Show More button section just below the video to access the tutorial on my blog, where you'll find all the information you need to create along with me. Okay, now that we're settled to viewing from the blog post, we can begin. Today's little project is this gorgeous little seahorse card, and the seahorse is from the stamp set Seaside Notions. Let me just grab that for you. Here it is here, and of course a beautiful little seahorse, shells, a bit of sand and some gorgeous sentiments. Really lovely little stamp set. It's the new cling stamps that are in the new catalogue that's just gone live. I totally fell in love with this the minute I seen it, and I have loads and loads of ideas for this, so make sure to keep checking back or get onto my newsletter, better still, and that way you'll not miss anything. Now, with this project, we're going to obviously create the little seahorse, and there's a tiny bit of watercolouring there. We're going to sponge in a cloud background. We're going to sponge in the sea and the sand. But the sea, if you can see there, or notice that it is textured, and that has been textured using Stampin' Up's embossing paste. So I'll show you that technique and how to do that very easily. So let me just get ready and we'll get started. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to create the artwork, and today I'm using Balmy Blue and Pacific Point. They will do both the sky and the sea. So I've cut some little masks. As I say, all information, all measurements are on the blog, so if you're on there, you've already got access to it. So I've cut some masks, and I'm just going to use a bit of semi-permanent tape to hold them onto my artwork piece. And the artwork piece is just a piece of standard Whisper White cardstock. It's not the thick one. When I'm doing sponging techniques, I like to use the standard cardstock. So I have this cut to size, and I'm just going to stick it down on the artwork. That's just scrap paper underneath. There we go, that's the masking done. So we'll start with Balmy Blue ink pad. And I already have a Stampin' sponge. It's cut into quarters, and I've just put it onto a little bill clip. So that maybe could do with being inked up a little bit, but let's see how it goes. So with the sponge, I just apply the colour onto the artwork piece where the area isn't masked. Now, normally I'm quite fussy about sponging and blending, but in this, because there's going to be texture, you don't actually have to worry too much. You don't need to be an expert at sponging. So I'm getting just some colour in there, some beautiful blue. Isn't that, whoops, a daisy, just the loveliest shade. Perfect for seaside. Well, there'll be no seaside out this window today. We have thunder and lightning at the minute, which is quite rare. Okay, so that's the Balmy Blue for there finished. Let me just, what I'm going to do actually is take this off and move it down before I move on to any other colours. I'm going to mask this a little bit off here, leaving a line just slightly, whoops, a daisy, just slightly above it. Hopefully you can see that. Oh, it's not sticking. I've taken too much off. Bear with me. Okay, and rub off any excess of the temporary adhesive from the top. Okay, now, give me a second. I have a little clouds template that I made here a while back, and I'm going to use it to obviously create the clouds. So I'm back again with the Balmy Blue taking some of that colour off because I don't want it too heavy, and just sponge in lightly, and let's see how this turns out. There we go. I think that's enough for the clouds for now. And I go back to my original position with the mask, and what I'm going to do now is using the same sponge, as it's lighter than the next colour I'm going to use, I bring in Pacific Point. This is the old style ink pad. I've had this for years and years. And turn it round. So this is the horizon line here, and I'm just going to, whoops, bring some of the Pacific Point along the horizon line just to deepen it a bit. And I specifically want it there. And then let it travel a little down into sea. You're not going to cover totally the balmy blue colour that you did before, but you're going to bring it down a little ways. There we go. So let me just take this off again. I'll have to clean all this adhesive off, obviously, but I'll do that later when I'm out of the way. Let me get this, can't get my nail underneath that. Oopsie daisy. Take that mask off there. So I can put this away, and we're going to bring in the sand colour. And for this, I'm actually using Sahara sand. Again, this is a very old ink pad that has had much abuse over the years, but still working fine. So just apply the Sahara sand to the beach area, which kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Again, I'm not worrying too much about my sponging technique because we're going to be adding texture over the top of this. And then just to deepen and richen that colour a little bit, I'm going to bring in some crumb cake. Again, using the same sponge. Oh, I think that might actually need re-inked. I'm just going to re-ink the crumb cake ink pad because it's a little bit dry. So these re-inkers are fantastic, not just for re-inking the ink pads, but for using them on ink techniques which I have on various posts on my blog. So let's see what that's like. I think that should do the job. And I use an old card. It's an old Slimming World card, which I should be using to better purposes. But let me get that out of the way. Now, let's see what this ink is like. Now, that's much better. And just sponge a little bit of that in, more to the lower areas. I tend to leave that light shade at the water's edge, just a little bit like that. So that is the sponging done. There we go. So the next thing we want to do is to add the texture. Now I'm using Stampin' Up's embossing paste. this is a very old one. This has got to be 2 or 3 years old now. In case you're wondering, I use an envelope sleeve to keep a tighter seal on the lid. However, it has over time, as you will see, hardened. But what I did in this instance, and it won't work in every instance, I have another tub that was just beyond salvaging, but I just scooped some of this out. It's dry and lumpy. I scooped some of it out, whoops, into a lid, added a little bit of water and basically mashed it up so it's got a paste consistency again. I just hope I haven't added too much water to it. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to lift it onto the palette knife. You can see there's a little bit on it there. And you set it basically onto your artwork. Try not to have it too lumpy, but you're setting it down to create the look of foam in the sea waves. And you just work away. Likewise down onto the sand area. Let me get some of this off. It will lift some of the colour as you work with it too. Don't worry about that. Okay, so this is the piece. It's still quite wet. I do think I maybe had added a little bit too much water to the paste, but I do think it will dry in okay. So I now set that aside to dry for a little while. And while that's drying, oops, I will bring in my watercolour paper. I've cut a little piece already and I put it on this waterproof background just to see if my graph paper underneath, and I'll just grab the stamp, which of course is the little seahorse. Need the Versamark here and my embossing buddy. Here it is. I always use my embossing buddy when I'm heat embossing to remove any moisture or oily fingerprints, etc. from the cardstock, because your embossing powder will stick to them and it will just look really messy. So some Stampin' Up! Versamark onto the stamp, stamp it down, give it a couple of seconds. Got powder on my nails. Okay, let me see. Right, I think that's okay. So let me just get this, oops, lift it up and put into, let me grab the embossing powder. I keep the powder in these little trays with a spoon because it's easier for me to work with. Apply a liberal amount of the embossing powder. None of it's going to go to waste anyway. Tap off the excess, and there we go. You can see, just about see the seahorse there, but it's quite powdery looking. So let me get a lid back on this before it ends up being tipped over my work area. And I'll turn the sound off while I do the heat embossing. There we go. That looks, yes, that looks all nice and shiny. There's no powdery bits. So that's that done. Let me stick it right back down here again and move this off my work surface. So what I want to do now is bring in my tools for colouring the seahorse. And that's going to be my balmy blue and my Pacific Point again. So we'll start with the balmy blue. Actually, I'm going to use a block. Let me just grab one for the ink because I don't like ink, even on the palette. I don't like ink on the, or water, sorry, anywhere near the ink pads at all. So I'm transferring some ink onto a block for now. And normally, I mean, you can use your aqua painter, but today I'm going to use an old clear Wink of Stella brush. So basically, it's done. But if you use it with water, it's still, you can use it almost like an aqua painter, and it gives a lovely shimmer. So I'm going to use it and one of the Stampin' Spritzers just with plain water in it and give the seahorse a good coating of water. This is lovely actually because you don't have to be at all careful with this process and start adding, just giving it a wash with the balmy blue. There we go. That's just nice and rough. There we are. Now I'm going to give that a quick dry before I do any more, so we'll turn the sound off again. Now I haven't dried it completely, just enough to set that colour a little bit, and I'm going to give it another wee spray. And bring in the darker colour, so let me grab another block. Use the Pacific Point, put some onto my block, and it's the same process over again. I want this on the outer kind of edge of it, on his little snout. Is it a snout? His nose? Not sure what it's called. Down his spine and a little bit into his beautiful curly tail. A little bit maybe in his jawline to define it, and the front of his belly. Okay, I'm going to dry this again a little bit, and then if I want to darken any areas, I'll just add some more colour while it's kind of dry. Just mop up that big blob of water. Righty-ho, and let me see. Okay, I'm going to dry this off a little better and then fussy cut it out before we move on to the next step. Okay, So there's the gorgeous little seahorse finished. I'll set him to the side and we can do the rest of the card, the mats and the what would you call it, the border and what have you. So give me a second. Okay, these are the remaining pieces. I've got my card base already cut and scored. I've got a matted layer there, and then the frame that the art piece will sit behind. I've already marked the frame off 1.5 centimeters round all 4 sides, and I'm just going to bring my trimmer in and cut the window out. There we go. I just need to use an eraser to take off the pencil marks now. Right, so we're nearly finished already. What I've done was I've added a little bit of linen thread. I don't think Stampin' Up! Sell this anymore, so if you've got some in your stash, you're very lucky. But you could add something similar just to give it a wee bit more texture. I've added a little bit of linen thread then to the artwork piece. I've mounted or used Tombow multi-purpose liquid glue to stick that to the matte piece, which I've added up on dimensionals then onto the card base. So that just leaves me with the frame, which I've added a load of dimensionals to. I've also added a little bit of grass, I suppose you would call it, so that it shows through in the corner. What I used for that was, there's a lovely little grass die in the, let me just check the name. Yes, in the Wiggly Bugs dies die set. But what I did was I used, let's see what end would this be, can't remember. Instead of using the cut piece, I used the piece that you would normally throw away because it has a strange kind of shape to it. And I thought that was more seaweedy looking, if that makes sense at all. And I just sponged a little bit of old olive on it to distress it and cut a tiny piece and just stuck it onto the back there. So it just remains here for us to put the frame in position. Let me try and do this without knocking the camera and getting it straight at the same time, which for me is quite rare. Let me see if I can lift it up and do it. It's hard to see. No, I can't. I need to look down over it. Let's see what that's. Oh, it's not too bad actually. So that's the frame in position, as you can see. And now the little seahorse, I've added some dimensionals, 2 of the larger ones, 1 of the tiny one, and even 1 of the tiny ones cut down. Again, just to hold that little tail in position. Let me take these off. There we go. And he's ready to into position. So I like him sitting with his snout slightly over the frame like that. You could of course add sentiments and what have you to it, but I like it as it is, and then when I come to use the card I can add whatever else is needed, either the sentiments or, you know, the message inside and what have you. But isn't that just a beautiful little picture, even put into a frame, into a beautiful frame, a little gold, burnished gold frame or something like that, white frame, would be a lovely gift for someone. So that's it for today, and thank you for sticking with me. In summary, what we've basically covered cutting the frame, sponging, creating clouds, and creating texture using the embossing paste, a little bit of heat embossing and what have you. So I do hope you've enjoyed it. I have so much more to share with you, so make sure to stay tuned to my channel by subscribing to it. And if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to be first in the queue, make sure you're signed up for my free newsletter, where you'll be first to preview videos and PDF tutorials before they're released to the public. Not to mention, you'll be first to be notified of any fantastic new promotions, classes and general good news. Now, who doesn't need that, eh? So simply click on the sign up link below the video in the show more section and sign up now. So until next time, bye.